Today, we welcome back Dr. Anthony J. to the show. He joined us a couple weeks ago or a month or so ago, and he went over his book, Estrogeneration, and a lot of the reasons why you should eliminate plastics. But we touched briefly on his other fascination, which he does research at the Mayo Clinic regarding genetics. And he has wrapped that into doing gene analyses for people to have actual modifications in their diet and their lifestyle to make sure that they are healthy as possible when relating to their genes. So we actually took my data that I've had from 23andMe for a long period of time. He ran it through his custom software that he does with analyses, and then we go through basically what he does on a one-on-one basis with people. So I learned some things here I did not know, even though I've gone through some gene editing programs before, and it was super fascinating. So if you guys are looking into any sort of ways to optimize your health, it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. You need to look at your genes on top of your preferences and how you respond to certain foods. So this one is super interesting. We also posted a video on YouTube that goes over the actual document. So if you're interested in that, just go to YouTube and search my name, Anthony J, or just go to my channel, Dr. Anthony Gustin, and you will find the video there. So tune into this one, and I hope you guys enjoy. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and the best information about a ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. Doc, thanks for coming on the show again.
Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to do a little bit different episode. So we chatted last time a lot about plastics, all this garbage, your book, and touched a little bit about genetics and what you do with a consulting company. So we chatted offline. You said, hey, why don't we just do a consult that I would normally do about genetics and how you can cater towards your own genetics as, sort of an informational thing where people can understand sort of the ins and outs of like where this industry is at and what you can actually functionally do with your genes. So generous offer of you, appreciate it. And here we are.
Yeah, thanks. This is good. And the most important backdrop info in terms of at least this genetic report is that we have 2 copies of DNA in every cell in our body. A lot of people don't realize we actually have 2 copies of DNA, except egg and sperm cells. Egg and sperm cells only have 1 copy of DNA. So of course, when they fuse together, that's where you got the copy of DNA from your mother and the copy from your father. And that's where you get these plus pluses and plus minuses. A lot of people see this on all the different genetic reports. You can do these free reports online. Generally, they're more confusing than helpful for a lot of people. But, on those reports, you'll see plus, 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 minus, minus, minus. And for me, most of the time what that means, plus, plus would mean you got a bad version of the gene from your mother and a bad version of that gene from your father. That's usually how I would simplify it because I'm looking for bad genes, right? I'm not interested in your good genes, Anthony, because you have thousands of good genes. We have 25,000 genes. We could spend all day talking about how amazing your genes are. But really, I want to find the problem genes and figure out, okay, what's the root cause, right? Like some people have a risk for Alzheimer's and it's related to heavy metals. And you can see that in their genetics, but other people don't have that risk for Alzheimer's. They've got a risk for Alzheimer's relating to inflammation or relating to carbs and sugar or something else. So I like to understand those precise risks and what categories they fit in. Can help you basically approach those risks and say, look, my mom had Alzheimer's, but I don't want to get it. So because my risk is related to heavy metals, I'm going to be super proactive and be checking my heavy metals or whatever the case is, right?
Right. Yeah. So just a few questions before we get started. One would be the source for people when they do this. I sent you my 23andMe data. Is can people just go out and get this information anywhere? And obviously you offer this service, other people offer this service, but like the source of it, we're not looking at the entire genome. So
right.
People, I think, are a little confused around like how much information are we actually getting? What are you actually looking at?
Yeah, good call. I mean, so 23andMe, Ancestry.com, these companies look at your SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, and 23andMe does about 650,000 SNPs, and those are within your genes. And again, we have about 25,000 genes. Whereas so 650,000 SNPs, that's a lot of information. That's thousands and thousands of pages of information. And Ancestry, they do about 900,000 SNPs, but it's not 4 billion, right? It's not your full genome, which is like 3 or 4 billion base pairs. But it's still a ton of information, and it's the most relevant to people's health. So what people do is they do their 23andMe like you've done, right? You've got the V4 chips, you did yours a while ago. And then they send me that raw data. And I've actually created my own software to analyze the DNA because I just wasn't happy with any of the other reports out there. Certainly 23andMe's was really weak. They tell you like your eye color and things like that. And it's like, well, I already know my eye color. Like, I'm not interested. And there's a lot of information in this stuff. I mean, you can really learn a lot.
Right. So what about when you're actually looking at this stuff? I get a little turned off by some of these sort of analyses when it's looking at, okay, you have this thing and we're taking some really weak epidemiological study
Exactly.
and then saying, okay, well, it looks like you have this gene, therefore you're going to have whatever.
Cancer.
How do you parse out epidemiology from actual mechanistic changes that you can actually take we have some science behind?
Exactly. Super good question, particularly in nutrition, because our epidemiology in nutrition is literally, in my opinion, it's more harmful than helpful. It's more confusing than helpful for people because they make these outrageous claims on these little tiny, significances. And it's a big joke, really. I mean, they're doing questionnaire studies and asking people what they're eating. People don't even really remember what they're eating. And anyways, that's exactly why, you have to go through this stuff really carefully. And like a good example of that is Promethease. You probably heard of Promethease. It used to be free, and then they charge like $15. You can upload your DNA. I still recommend it to people if they want to look through their DNA. And then you can search certain genes, like say you're interested in, your sirtuin gene, right? A lot of people are talking about sirtuin, particularly that Harvard researcher, David Sinclair, and resveratrol, and how your sirtuin gene, the status of your sirtuin gene is going to impact your lifespan and longevity. Well, you can just type in sirtuin on Promethease, and you can look up the version that you've got. The problem with Promethease, though, like you're saying, they'll have like hundreds of pages of risks, and it'll say like you have a 1.3-fold increased risk for breast cancer and a 1.4-fold increased risk for prostate cancer, and on and on and on and on. The problem is when they repeat those scientific studies, they don't hold up. So if they just do it with a larger group of people, they find zero increased risk for prostate cancer, breast cancer, or whatever the thing is. So what I'm looking for really stringent results, really well-powered, well-done studies, preferably at least a 2-fold risk or higher for something. So at some point you just have to make a cutoff and just commit to it and say, this is where I stand. I'm looking for really powerful significance. And, it's always open for debate to some degree.
How do you stay on top of all the new research that comes out? Do you have something that like scrapes research and then applies it to your thought around like, hey, if it's X, then this is sort of like the Y result of how I'm going to apply it? Or how do you take the new research and?
Yeah, exactly. Excuse me. Yeah. I mean, I have different ways to screen for that research, but it's, for the most part, most of the field has moved out of the genetics and they've moved on to epigenetics. So initially in 2000, I don't know, was it 2003 or something when Bill Clinton did the human genome? Maybe it was 2000, huh? Do you remember the date when they did the full genome? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they spent some billions of dollars to get one single genome, and when they were, like the entire field of scientists shifted over to GWAS studies, which are genome-wide association studies. They were doing these massive, investigations of all the genes and all these associations like you're mentioning. And they've done this for a long time. So there's a lot of good research on it, but then they've shifted out into epigenetics now. And a lot of the scientists kind of scoff at genetics and they say, well, it's just genetics. Now it's all about epigenetics. And that's not really a good way to look at it because they're both super powerful. The epigenetics, the marks on top of the DNA, and the DNA itself, you really want both of those pieces of information, right? So there's not that much new research. I mean, the point is there's not that much new research coming out on these genetic SNPs, day to day, except for maybe mechanistic stuff where like biochemists are coming in and saying, well, let's look, let's have some cells with this version of a gene, some cells with this version of the gene. Everything else about those cells is exactly the same. Let's look at how it interacts with the resveratrol or zinc or whatever.
Yeah.
So those are still going on, but the actual population-based stuff is pretty much done. It's never really done, but it's definitely been wound down.
There's enough of it, I'm sure, at this point too.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding, I think some people have some confusion around, this term you threw, epigenetics versus genetics, DNA versus these things that sit on top of your DNA, and wondering like, hey, Kay, you're going to go through this report here. Is this changeable? Is it just set in stone? Like, what are the things that obviously you can do some stuff to modify your lifestyle? But like, what changes here versus a regular DNA epigenetics? Like, what are the differences between all these things?
Yeah, good question. So, epigenetics, the analogy I like to use is musical notes. So if you play music, you got, sheet music, you got a staff, and you got black dots on the staff. If you've got just single black dots on that staff, single musical notes, and that's melody, like da, 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 you can give that sheet music to somebody else and they can play Mary Had a Little Lamb just fine. And they can give it to somebody else, they can play Mary Had a Little Lamb. They can just keep passing that around. That's your DNA. You pass that on, it doesn't really change. You get the copy from your mother, the copy from your father, so it gets mixed in. But it's pretty simple and it doesn't change. And then if you add notes on top of those notes, like you add chords, you still have that melody, you still have that DNA, but now you've got epigenetics. Now you've got marks on top of the DNA. And those get passed on as well, which is really powerful. So epigenetics is inheritable and it is passed on, but it's a lot harder to study because it's constantly changing. And there's a lot of different ways to change those marks and a lot of different types of marks on the DNA. So that's a bit more of a black box and a bit more mysterious. I mean, it's harder to study. It's definitely being studied. I study it personally. I study epigenetics on stem cells and things, but super complicated topic. Whereas DNA, again, once you've done your DNA, it doesn't change. You spit in that tube, you send it off to 23andMe, your DNA is going to stay the same for your whole life. So if I find a genetic issue, like I mentioned before with the Alzheimer's risk and heavy metals, you're going to have that risk for the rest of your life. I mean, if your brain doesn't clear heavy metals very well, that's always going to be kind of a potential weak spot. Okay. So the solution there isn't, like to just give up and say, oh shit, like, I have this risk, I'm screwed, I'm going to get Alzheimer's. The solution is, well, watch your heavy metals. And that's a perfectly valid solution. So those are the types of solutions I'm looking for, which are identify the risk, figure out, like, oh, my body doesn't handle carbs very well. I don't handle heavy metals very well, whatever the thing is, and approach it from a lifestyle perspective in that way.
Okay. Cool. Well, let's get into it. I'll start sharing my screen here. And then who are listening to this, also posting this on YouTube to see if you guys want to see the report, because I'm sure we'll get a little wordy with some of these things. And as we go through, PRM1, RS104, 85057. It's like, we'll have the report if you guys want to check it out. Let me just share my screen real quick.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the screen. And like these RS codes, the people can look them up if they want, but they certainly don't have to. There it is. So yeah, you can jump right down to page 2, which is like the brain section. So the way I've done it is I've organized it into 5 sections. I've got brain, I've got diet, I've got vitamins, hormone detox. That's section 3. I've got the gym. And then the last section is the sleep section. And sometimes people ask me, well, can you just do my brain genes? Or can you just do my heart disease risk genes or whatever? But the problem is it's very holistic, because sometimes you'll have a heart disease risk gene that's dependent on something like iron. Like, for example, Anthony, there's a genetic risk that's a 10-fold higher risk of heart disease if your iron is high. But if your iron is fine, you don't have any heart disease risk. So, it's important to know your iron. Like, how does your body manage iron? How are your detox genes relating to iron?
Right.
And if those are excellent, you're probably good. It's still worth checking your iron, but not quite as, proactively, not quite as aggressively. But if you've got terrible iron clearance and you've got a 10-fold higher risk of heart disease relating to iron, you should be in there, like every year, checking your iron, probably donating blood.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it's pretty holistic. So starting with the brain section, honestly, your brain performance genes are phenomenal. There's really no issues there. And most people have a bunch of genes in this section. So it's pretty exceptional not to have any genes in that section.
Yeah. And I'll be curious. I haven't looked at this at all. I was waiting for you to go through this, so I didn't have any sort of expectation going in. But what's interesting as I just go through this, I'll find as close to like family history stuff, is that nowhere in my family history has anyone had any sort of Alzheimer's or a degenerative disease at all, period.
Exactly. I'm not surprised. Yeah.
When you have this, for instance, the first one here, this melancholy serotonin plus that you were talking about before, are you able to tell which one is maternal versus paternal?
Nope.
Okay. So I can't so it would be interesting to see if there's a plus minus, say, okay, is there this thing on my mother's side or my father's side? But if you can't tell, then you can't tell.
Exactly. You can't, although oftentimes you can predict. But yeah, that's the first gene that comes on, right? Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, all right.
It's funny. That's one of the most common questions I have. It's like, well, which parent did I get this from? But yeah, I wish you could tell. It'd be interesting if there was a tag of some kind, but there's not. But yeah, the first gene that comes up, like you said, it's related to, it's a depression risk gene if you've got issues with serotonin. And by issues, I mean generally if your gut is screwed up. 80 to 90% of your serotonin is made in your gut, which most people don't realize. Most people think of serotonin as a brain chemical, which it is, but because most of it is made in your gut, it gets transported up into your brain. And so if your gut is screwed up, if you're eating standard American, a bunch of fast food, a bunch of preservatives, a bunch of garbage, yeah, your gut's going to be screwed up and you're not going to have enough serotonin and you're going to have a pretty high depression risk. Assuming your gut's good, you're usually good with this gene. It's a pretty common gene. So I don't get too worried about it unless, of course, you have a bunch of symptoms, in which case serotonin is a good target. And similar with anxiety, both of those anxiety risk genes on this report are related to serotonin, SLC6A4, TPH2. Again.
Yeah. So you're saying there could be some problems with melancholy, anxiety due to serotonin. Serotonin is primarily secreted in the gut. Therefore, look at the gut health, and we'll chat through that later.
Exactly. Yeah. And TPH2 is SLC6. Those are both serotonin transporters. They help get that serotonin from your gut, from your lower body up into your brain. Yeah. And then caffeine, at least you don't have any anxiety risk from caffeine. Some people have a long list of anxiety risk genes with caffeine. But it stays in your body a little longer than normal, but nothing too crazy. You don't burn it super fast. You don't burn it super slow. Not really that important, but most people want to know their caffeine genes. Now, the nicotine dependence genes are kind of rare. Most people don't really have too much in this section. You've got 2++s relating to nicotine dependence. So my guess is your grandparents smoked a lot, maybe even your parents.
Yeah, but all my grandparents and then my parents both still smoke.
Yeah.
They had since they were like 14.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. It's like I say, it's rare enough. Anybody can get addicted to nicotine if they're doing it all the time, but to have actual nicotine dependence genes, risk genes, are pretty rare. And the first one is OPRM1. That's your opioid mu receptor. So you've, of course, heard of opioids and your opioid receptor. Have you ever tried Kratom, by the way? Kratom?
Yeah, a couple of times. Chris Bell sent me some stuff.
Oh, yeah, cool. What Mind Bullet or whatever?
Yep.
What's your response to Kratom?
I just feel like I got a little high. I had some THC.
Yeah.
And more just spaced out than anything. Yeah. That's what my experience was.
Yeah, because this is the mu receptor. This is the receptor that Kratom binds. So regular opioids that are real addictive, like heroin and things, they bind the other opioid receptors, which are powerfully addictive and problematic. But the mu receptor is less addictive generally. But the version you've got, it's unusual. It's rare. So I'm just curious how you respond to to Kratom because it's probably different than most people. And so basically similar with nicotine, when you have nicotine, you're actually triggering that opioid response a lot more than most people. Therefore, you're more at risk. So I wouldn't even mess with nicotine if I was you, to be honest. I wouldn't do the nicotine gum as a nootropic or anything. Whereas most people, it's not that big of a deal.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I smoked one cigarette when I was like 15.
Yeah,
good. Sucks. Why do people like this?
Good.
I grew up and I was like, this is down. And haven't since then. So
good. Well, like for me, right? Like I grow my own tobacco. I roll my own cigars. I smoke once a week in the summers over at a campfire with some friends. I even have a cigar club that I go to once in a while. But again, once a week for somebody like you, that would be a risk. I wouldn't mess with that. For somebody like me, it's no big deal. I have no issues getting off that for 6 months at a time, for a year at a time. So I don't feel like I'm playing with fire, but you might be, and that's a pun. But anyways. And then nicotine metabolism is also kind of slow, so it's going to stay in your body longer. And it's worth noting too that you don't do as well with toxic mold with that same gene. Hopefully you've never been exposed to mold, so hopefully you don't have any experience with that, but just be careful with mold.
Yeah, good to know.
Yeah, and I mean, having 0 genes in that lifespan section also really, really good. So even though your parents and your grandparents smoke and whatnot, they probably have pretty exceptional longevity. And that's, again, pretty rare. I feel like most people have some genes in that section.
So the lifespan is more lowered lifespan, or are there also ones that say,
you live longer?
Yeah.
Well, because you don't have any risk variance in that section.
That's what we're assessing here.
Yeah, you've actually got good genes. So you want to see a bunch of empty categories, right? Like the fact that you don't have any gene risks in the dairy section is good, because that means you don't have dairy sensitivity risk. And even if you have genes, sometimes you don't necessarily have dairy sensitivity, but honestly, most people do. Did you have any questions on that brain section, or switch over to the diet section?
Yeah, we'll roll into the diet.
Cool. So, I mean, like I said, dairy, I already mentioned, you're clean. Type 2, virtually everybody has a few risk genes in the type 2 diabetes section. And that's a good indicator to me that humans aren't built to eat a ton of carbs. That's not something specific to you. That's just a human thing. And of course, everybody
has a little bit of mix between these 5 different genes that you could have, or 5 different.
What's that?
Because everybody that you see typically has some mix of these 5 different areas of type 2 diabetes that they can have SNPs on.
Exactly. Like some people have a whole long list of insulin resistance genes in the type 2 diabetes insulin inflammation section. Some people have 6 or 7 related to glucose metabolism. I mean, yours are pretty good, honestly. Your type 2 diabetes risk genes are better than most people's, I would say. Although I would also say later on the report, I feel like grains are a really hot issue. So like grains, I would definitely take off the table, but at least your body does pretty well with carbs. And we'll circle back to grains in a little bit, but I have, of course, bumped into a few people that have 0 risk genes for type 2 diabetes. And they're always the ones that think everybody can eat a ton of carbs and there's no consequences.
Of course.
And that's why you can't get too religious about this stuff, right? Like some people are super hyper religious about their diet and saying everybody should do my diet because it worked for me. And obviously everybody's genes are pretty different here.
Right.
But I mean, zinc is really important. That SLC gene is a zinc transporter that helps you clear blood sugar. So making sure you've got optimal levels of zinc is really key. And of course, red meat is the best source of zinc, unless you're doing a ton of mollusks or something. But, obviously you're eating a lot of red meat, right? So you're good there.
Yep.
Yeah. And the MC4R gene, the only other one here, again, really actually pretty good genes for handling. I mean, what's your blood sugar fasted? Do you know?
Yeah. I mean, I actually took off my meter today. I was wearing a CGM, but usually high 70, low 80.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's probably not super difficult for you to keep it there.
It actually, I noticed like the last, like Q4 2020, I was working like 14 hours a day again. And like there were times where like work sucked. And those days it would be riding like 100 every day. Even if I would fast or eat really low carb, I could work out. It like wouldn't really budge anything. Like usually if it's food related or anything else, I can drive it down with walking or working out or doing any sort of activity. meditating, but like, yeah, there was a couple of days at a time where like I just noticed my stress level and my insulin, my fasting glucose just being
right
super high.
That's super interesting. I mean, and I'm glad you have the CGM because, that's something that people don't oftentimes pay attention to is how important it is to get your stress down, get your sleep. And they think it's all about diet. It's massive. It's a massive influencer, but yeah.
It's crazy. Like it basically pushed me into pre-diabetes.
Right.
And everything else was the same. And so, I mean, after I saw that for like 2 weeks straight, like 3 or 4 days a week, I was like, okay, time to unplug for a MC4R. This is okay.
Yeah. Well, time to take the CGM off. I'm just kidding. So the MC4R is interesting too, because thankfully you live in Texas. I mean, you live in an area where there's sunshine because, this gene is actually sunshine dependent, sunshine responsive. And it's a really cool story, and I'll try and be super brief with it, but you've probably heard of peptides and injecting peptides. And one of the peptides, I happen to have some in my fridge because I've tinkered with it a little bit. It's called Melanotan 2 in particular. And you can inject it and you'll get tan. And it's kind of funny. And, I did it last winter in the middle of the winter and I got tan. My freckles got super dark and I did about 3 injections and I got tan for a whole month. And I know people that do this all the time, but what I didn't expect when I did Melanotan, was I got super hungry and my metabolism shot way up. Like I was just burning calories like crazy. And that's because of this gene. Melanotan actually stimulates your alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, and that acts on this receptor, this MC4R melanocortin receptor. And so the long story short is sunshine literally improves your metabolism. And that's true for everybody, but especially important for you.
Got it.
And intermittent fasting also seems to really help with this gene, but and you have 2 intermittent fasting genes. The next one, adiponectin, ADIPOQ, that's your adiponectin gene. Basically, that's a hormone that helps you burn fat, and you make a little bit less of that hormone. And nobody wants to make less of a fat burning hormone, but the best way to increase production of adiponectin is to intermittent fast, skip breakfast. So, I like intermittent fasting for you. And again, virtually everybody has some intermittent fasting genes. So it's another one of those things. I just think, it's optimal for everybody, unless you're getting up at 5 a.m. and running a marathon or something and you need those calories. But yeah, I think intermittent fasting, similar to most people, it's good for you. But honestly, your obesity risk is pretty low, right? It doesn't really run in your family, at least real close family members.
Maybe not risk, but the lifestyle of my family.
Right. Sure.
Certainly. Like at times that there's not more like some of my family members are not far more obese than they already are, just because very typical. I mean, you live in Minnesota, you know what it's like.
Right.
Rural Minnesota is not very friendly to the waistline. And it really adds up.
Yeah. Yep. And heart disease, it starts off really good. You have that one LPL gene, which is related to triglycerides. So basically keep tabs on your triglycerides, but I imagine yours are like 80 or 60 or something.
Yeah. If I eat carbs, they can skyrocket pretty quickly.
Yeah. But keep them below 125. And then that gene is pretty much a non-factor for heart disease risk. Similar with CTH, I'm not too worried about that cystathionine gene, CTH, because it's a plus minus for starters. So you have one good copy, one bad copy. So it's not a super high risk, but it's probably worth looking at your homocysteine every once in a while and just making sure that's not high. And if it is high, you can increase your serine, because this function of this gene, CTH, the cystathionine gene, is it attaches serine to homocysteine, and then your body gets rid of it.
Okay.
But again, plus minus, I'm not really worried about that gene. Now, it's funny because...
What food sources are high in serine?
Serine, good question. Honestly, probably meat, because meat has a really good ratio of most of these really important amino acids. But honestly, I don't know off the top of my head. It's a good question. And it's kind of a rare gene, so I don't actually think about serine too often or homocysteine or this gene. But it's probably worth checking on future blood tests. And, after I just got done saying plus minus, it's not that big of a deal. You have 2 plus minuses in the lectin section. And one is SELE, it's called E-selectin, which is a lectin binding gene. And then the other one's MBL2, mannose binding lectin, is the name of these genes. And they both, even as plus minuses, they're both pretty rare, and they both give you higher risk of heart disease. And they're both involved in lectin binding and inflammation arising from binding lectins. So, you probably know about, you probably even talked to, what's the plant paradox? Gundry, Stephen Gundry. And, of course, he thinks everybody should avoid lectins because he's seen really good results. Usually, the biggest source of lectins in most people's diet is grains and wheat products and things like that. So if people avoid those, usually they feel amazing. They get a lot healthier, irrespective of how their body deals with actual lectins.
Right.
So he's had good experience with that. But generally, people don't need to get too, hypochondriac about avoiding lectins. But in your case, I'd be really careful with them because this first, even as a plus minus SELE, is a 4-fold higher risk of heart disease, for example, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't make my report. So like I say, even plus minuses on these 2 genes, and you've got 2 of them, and they're both fairly rare. It's enough of a motivator, I would say, to be careful lectin. So that's why I said before, your body does pretty well with carbs in general, but grains I'd be really careful with because they're a big source of lectins.
So interesting enough, this is the thing that when I've cut out in my diet the most, that when I bring it back, just destroys me all over the place. Yep. So energy, gut symptoms, acne, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I notice it. And and this is all grains too. It's not just wheat or gluten.
Exactly.
But I rarely eat the stuff.
Good. Yeah. And you're super dialed in. Most people I talk to, they're not nearly as dialed in. They're not wearing CGMs. They're not paying that much attention to their body. It's funny. Every once in a while, like some of my DNA clients, they're eating McDonald's and everything, and it's like, how did you find me? And whatever. But I'm glad they did. And I'm glad they're working, but
easy fixes for you though.
Yeah. Low hanging fruit.
So these ones specifically, you say, do a coronary calcium scan.
Yeah. I'd like to see people's CT scans, especially because if you have plaque, if you get a 0, awesome. That's where I want you to be. But if you have plaque, it's funny. A lot of cardiologists, they never reverse people's plaque. They talk about this. They'll say you can't reverse plaque. They'll tell you this, right? I talk to these cardiologists all the time. And some of them will say, well, maybe if you do a plant-based diet or whatever, you can maybe reverse. Most of them will say, no, you don't reverse plaque. You just stop progression. So you'll get a calcium CT of 80. And the best that they can do is get you on some statins or something and try and keep you at 80. That's their goal. But what's ironic is I've seen a lot of people reverse plaque, probably more than most cardiologists. And it's because I'm looking at these precise mechanisms saying, look, your risk has nothing to do with cholesterol and all this other stuff that people are chasing around. It has to do with, in your case, again, just looking at your report, lectins. Let's cut lectins. Your calcium CT is an 80. Let's get super aggressive cutting lectins and then go back in a year and check it. And you'd be surprised it'll go back down to 0 oftentimes.
Oh, wild.
I'm not guaranteeing it, but I've seen it so many times. It's shocking. And it shocks the doctors. I had one guy, I had him go on a keto diet. He had different genes. It wasn't related to lectins, but I had him do keto. And he's had a chronically high calcium CT. For years and years, doctors have been freaking out. He's been on statins, all the usual stuff. He did keto for 6 weeks and he got a 0 on his calcium CT 6 weeks later.
Wow.
Yeah, and his doctor didn't believe it. He thought something was wrong with the test. He had him go back and do the CT again the next week and he got a 0 again. But that's how shocking it was to his cardiologist.
He was at what before?
I can't remember the numbers, but it was legitimately dangerous high.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I got one last year. I was 31 at the time. Mm-hmm. 0. Yep. I was me being this young too, it's like most people typically don't see stuff, even if it has built up until later on. I don't think they suggest it for people until they hit 35 or so, for men especially. But yeah, I wanted to see. Yeah. I wanted to see. So
I'm glad you did. And again, lectins I feel like are your big target. And obviously stress isn't going to help and all that other stuff, but they did a study that was really shocking. When they were looking for fatty streaks, which are basically like the early form of plaques. There's little fat streaks on your arteries. They found that the fatty streaks start at age 11 in most American kids, which is crazy. Because again, it goes back to the standard. So you probably just had some, I imagine as a kid, number one, you're probably breathing a lot of smoke secondhand. And then number two, you probably were eating standard American.
No, I was eating terrible. Yeah. And I was like super overweight when I was younger as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. So it's probably residual. It's not like something, I don't think. And have you done a follow-up CT or just that one?
Just the one. 0. I'm planning probably to do it every 2 or 3 years until I reach 40 or so, then maybe I'll do it yearly. Also if I can just reduce radiation exposure. When I have no reason to expect it going up.
Exactly. Yeah. And 30 is not that bad. It's not a scale of 0 to 100 scale. So people, it's not like 30% of your plaque or your artery is occluded or anything like that.
Yeah. Mine was 0.
Oh, it was 0.
Yeah, 0.
Oh, I thought you said 30.
No, 0.
Oh, okay. I got you. Well, that's phenomenal too. Where did I get the number 30?
No idea.
I just made that up, huh? Okay. For some reason, I thought you said 30.
We're in the clear there.
30, but maybe you said 0, and I just heard 30 through my earphones. All right, cool. So that's way better. I just launched into this whole thing about fatty streaks and how you probably screwed it up as a kid and you got a 0 this whole time.
I probably did. And then
yeah, you probably reversed it.
By taking all lectins when I was 25.
Yeah, no, I agree. So anyways, CRP, good. You've got great genes. Leaky gut, of course, lights up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Most of these genes just, you don't have to do supplements. You don't have to do some specific thing, although your gut's definitely sensitive. I would say just grains in general, again, like you said, is probably the best target to being careful with in terms of protecting your gut, which in turn is going to protect your mood, your anxiety risk, all that stuff we talked about at the beginning. Like for example, ATG16L1, that's a real high risk for gluten sensitivity. And again, like all these genes, they just kind of add together to basically make your gut lining a little bit weaker, and grains are really harsh on the gut lining. I like mushrooms, mushroom extracts and things like that. They've got a vitamin called ergothioneine in mushrooms that help your gut lining. But even that, I think if you're avoiding grains, you're fine. And doing some intermittent fasting, giving your gut a break, not just pounding food down the gut all the time. Give it a break to reheal, lock back, tighten back up. Go into ketosis once in a while. Stuff you're doing, honestly.
Yeah. So notice these two IRGM2, IRGM3, then also the IBD5 here that you have. So you're saying, okay, mushrooms with this one decrease interferons, and then these two, curcumin, decreases interferons as well. Are they different receptors for the same thing, or what, how are you thinking about that? One being the two.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's a good question. IBD5, they call that gene, the abbreviation for that gene is inflammatory bowel disease number 5. So of course they discovered it researching inflammatory bowel disease. And scientists debate like crazy about exactly how the IBD arises. And there's like two camps. One of them is interferons, and then the other camp is ergothioneine transport relating to that gene. And mushrooms, like I say, they're rich in ergothioneine, which is a vitamin. So for that gene, I'm just generally recommending mushrooms. Whereas the other ones, the IRGM, they're called immunity-related GTPases. Those ones are it's well established that those are activated with interferons, like the inflammation from those genes. So curcumin is usually better. But honestly, you don't even need curcumin if you're just eating healthy. So some people, they eat healthy and they still have issues. And yeah, you want to have some ideas on what to tap into. And sometimes curcumin works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you want to try some other interferon, diminishing supplements or something like that. But at least you have some idea of the target to go after instead of just chasing your tail around and guessing.
Which is what you say if you have gut issues.
What's that?
Which is why you say here in capital IF, if you have gut issues.
If you have gut issues. Exactly.
Cool.
Yep.
In nothing. It's like so interesting. Like that was been the biggest thing. I had really bad acne growing up. Is brutal. And grains, man, just taking away grains, fixed it 100%. And then anytime I eat grains now, within 2 or 3 days, like clockwork, acne. I'm surprised something
I
like
wish
that, but
I wish more teenagers knew about that too. You know, these dermatologists never talk about it. But yeah, I mean, and maybe they are, like, maybe they're talking about it now more that the information's getting out, but I never hear that they're talking about it. Should we switch to the vitamin section, vitamin hormone detox?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, you know, I mentioned iron before at the beginning, just as an example. Of course, your iron genes are good. Your vitamin D genes are also really exceptional. And most people have quite a few vitamin D issues. So, I mean, you still have to supplement if you're not out in the sun, and it sounds like you're at a desk quite a bit. So honestly, I still am a fan of supplementing it in your case, but I mean, at least your genes are helpful here. How much do you I'm assuming you supplement vitamin D.
I try not to. In the wintertime, I maybe do, but today I was outside for 4 hours to start the day. Costa Rica last week. I mean, I'm done with this podcast. I have another one in a little bit, but I'll go outside in between. Like I get outside as much as possible. Right here, where I don't have it right now because we're recording, basically the sun shines right through here. I usually open the window. So I have strategies where I try to cope with the inherent desk work, but yeah, it's something
awesome.
I'm pretty strict about.
Good.
I usually I'm like between like 55 and 70 nanograms deciliter when I test.
Perfect. Yeah, and it's funny because some of the doctors you go to, they'll get all sweaty and be like, "Oh, you're 70. That's toxic levels." I'll tell you that it's too high, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's without supplementing. So
yeah, that's awesome. Good job.
More is that the advice I was going to give? Like,
yeah, right. Exactly.
Think within range, like adequate, and the reference range. I don't know if I've seen one recently, but it's like 19 or 20 ish.
Yeah, it's like a normal range.
Yeah, and all the research that I've seen, actually, that's like clinical like effectiveness doses or even doses, but levels are more like 50, 70, upwards of 80. But again,
right.
You know, we're looking at reference.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's a different thing.
Yeah. Well, they're so used to seeing, the average American is 30 on their vitamin D, and the doctors are so used to seeing 30 that they tell you it's fine. They give you a pat on the back, that they let you go. I mean, they've done studies on hunter-gathering tribes, and everybody in those tribes, I've looked at the blood work, everybody's between 70 and 100. And just like yourself, they're not supplementing anything. So it's certainly not toxic, and they're phenomenally healthy, except for all those parasites. Testosterone genes are good. SHBG plus minus, I'm not worried about that. You're getting zinc.
So that has actually been high on the high end last couple of times I've done my labs.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're eating meat though, right? You're getting your zinc.
Yeah.
I mean, you might add some boron, like add a boron supplement.
I literally just started taking it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I mean, Tonkat sometimes works too. Tonkat's probably the best, but it's also really expensive. It's literally like probably costs more than just getting actual testosterone replacement therapy.
Wow.
But it works to free up your testosterone. But yeah, you're probably just a little bit low on boron. But plus minus is nothing, right? And then estrogen, honestly, your estrogen genes are really good. You have one gene for low estrogen actually, and one gene for high estrogen.
They cancel each other out?
I think so. I'm not too worried, especially if you're using the sauna. It's hard to predict, right? Like when you have a yin yang like that, who knows?
Right.
But, honestly, natural estrogen is good for you too. Like you want a little bit of estrogen. You want your levels to be nice and high with estrogen as well as testosterone, as long as that ratio is not screwed up. If your testosterone's super low and your estrogen's super high, well, that's a problem.
Right. Right.
But if they're both high, there's protective aspects for your brain performance, for your arteries. Again, I'm actually not too worried there. Thyroid, your thyroid genes are good, man. Like a lot of people have a lot of thyroid risk genes and issues. One plus minus in that section. I mean, it's a pretty high risk for autoimmune thyroid risks. So I would say grains would be a big risk for your thyroid, because if they're triggering a bunch of inflammation, I mean, this even as a plus minus, just to give you the numbers here, a plus minus on this thyroglobulin gene is a 10-fold higher risk of autoimmune thyroid issues. But that's because most Americans are chronically inflamed. And if you happen to be chronically inflamed, you're at a super high risk. I don't think you are chronically inflamed. And I think the best way to prevent chronic inflammation in your case, again, avoid grains.
Yeah.
So I'm not really honestly worried in this gene, in that gene. Carotene, not worried. I mean, pretty good vitamin genes, really good actually. Bilirubin, you have a couple of pluses here, but you're getting out in the sun. And that's the key. If you were here in Minnesota, your bilirubin would probably be high, and you'd probably be pretty familiar with high blood checks on bilirubin if they were actually checking it. So just keep getting out in the sun, keep breaking down that bilirubin, I'm not worried about it if you're getting sunshine.
Good.
Yeah. And then B9, I mean, your methylfolate genes and everything else are really good. You have that one TCN2 gene, which is less common. It's called transcobalamin number 2. And what they found with this gene actually is if you supplement too much methylfolate, you can actually get like nervous system disorders and things. So like a lot of people nowadays, they're like, well, I'm just going to take folic acid or methylfolate, because just in case I've got bad MTHFR genes. Everybody talks about MTHFR, which is good because people that have MTHFR issues, it's a real issue. It's a really bad thing. It causes a lot of miscarriages and things like that. Depression sometimes you see, really, really common. But if you're just loading up on B9 methylfolate or folic acid, especially in your case, that would be a problem. If it's imbalanced with B12. I honestly would probably just stay away from the B vitamins if I was you and just eat meat, and you should be fine. Have you ever checked like your B12 and stuff?
Yeah, it's usually pretty good. I mean, I eat between 1.5 to 2 pounds of meat a day, so I don't think this should be an issue.
Yeah. I mean, that's the key with all your B genes. You've got pretty good B vitamin genes. Heavy metals, you have that one glutathione gene. It's a plus minus. Like I would say I wouldn't worry about it unless you have some symptoms like, oh, I've got migraines or something that are inexplicable. And usually when I do DNA consults, I send people an email and say like, what kind of chronic health issues, if any, do you have, and that sort of thing. So I can think through this stuff. But, I doubt you have heavy metal issues. You're not like, you're living pretty damn healthy.
Yeah, I actually got tested recently. Clear.
Good.
I did have a bunch of pesticides though.
Yeah, they're so hard to, get away from. You can do everything and you still get them just everywhere. But the last gene in this detox and vitamins and hormone section is related to fructose metabolism. And basically your body wants to store fructose as fat instead of burn it as energy. So you want to be careful with fructose, and it doesn't mean you can never have it, but certainly, the fruit juices and the sodas and all the stuff with like tons of fructose would be a real problem.
I have to cut those out.
Yeah, you do. So
like, even though like, I don't know what's correlated here either, but I know some people like in a more carnivore thing, like it's getting popular to not eat more fruit. I've been testing this stuff as well. I just generally don't do a lot of carbs, but man, I ate an orange last week. It was Costa Rica. My blood sugar went up to like 180. It's like, I don't know if it's obviously fructose wouldn't have that result, but I don't know if it's like the combination of what my body's just like, okay, high fructose, not good. Honey's the same way. I can eat local honey from here. My blood sugar will go up to like 200 within, 30 minutes or so.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting.
And I noticed my LDL, obviously we can talk a lot about if it means anything or not, but LDL and triglycerides both go up dramatically if I have anything high fructose, things like honey or fruits in often.
Oh yeah. 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 I mean, and nobody wants extra fat. I had a woman from Romania one time who had this gene, and she was 100 pounds. And she had been diagnosed with fatty liver because her stomach hurt. She's a super skinny. So she thought she was eating tons of fruit because everybody says fruit is healthy. And she went in because she had stomach pains. They did a scan. She had fatty liver, and sure enough, when it came,
and fructose.
Yeah. So anyways, and then what's interesting too, just to jump ahead a little bit, like in the gym section, you'll notice on the bottom of the next page, there's a section that says joints, and then in brackets it says gout, like your gout risk. And you've got two SLC2A9 genes, and those are both fructose transporters. So if you're eating a ton of fructose, that will actually drive uric acid into your joints, and that forms crystals, which is gout. And of course, the doctors will say, well, stop eating meat, right? And at the end of the day, for you, it's all about fructose and fructose transport and just cutting fructose. But we can go back to the top of the gym section. I just wanted to tie that together because clearly your ancestors probably just didn't eat a ton of fruit, except in the real recent times.
Yeah, everything in my ancestry is like far back as possible, German, French sort of area. Yeah. Mom's maiden name is Uderman, meaning like man who milks udders of cow.
Oh, that's funny.
Like
yeah.
Very, very much farmers, like Western European farmers.
Sure. Cool. Yeah. So switching over to the gym, I mean, you're kind of a mix between fast and slow twitch muscles. So you're pretty versatile. You can do the heavy stuff. You can do the endurance stuff. Yeah, I think it's all good.
This matches between, I'm like not good at anything athletic. So makes sense.
Well, that might just be you, but so, I mean, at least you get benefits, from doing all the different types of training. You don't get pigeonholed into one specific thing. Dopamine, DRD4, I think, it's better for you to do some workout variation. You get a better nervous system response. Like instead of most people, they just do the rowing machine or they just do, bent over rows or whatever. You want to switch it up, do some dumbbell rows every 6 weeks or so, maybe switch it up. You'll get a higher response, but it's just a plus minus. I wouldn't get too religious about that. Mm-hmm. And then the risk for joint related inflammation, like arthritis related inflammation, the 1++, honestly, you have pretty good genes here. The 1++ you have is that HLA gene. And that's a 5-fold higher risk of rheumatoid. Does your parents have rheumatoid?
My great grandmothers did.
Oh, that's it. Okay. So it's not too bad.
My sister did when she was younger.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, they might have different plus minus genes or whatever too, but I mean, a 5-fold risk is high, but this one is triggered by high insulin. So like if your blood sugar is optimized, which it is, I'm honestly not the least bit worried. If you're constantly spiking your insulin and your blood sugar, that's a huge risk. And that's why that risk is so high, because most Americans have chronically high blood sugar. So of course it's going to come up when they do these population-based studies as a really, really high risk. And the other ones I'm not really worried about, assuming you're eating healthy. But, keeping your thyroid is important. The one related to your thyroid, DIO2, is interesting because I work with a lot of orthopedic surgeons. I get stem cells from them and things at the Mayo Clinic. And you'll never hear an orthopedic surgeon say, look, you need a knee replacement, but first let's check your thyroid hormones, right? But in your case, that would be a real valid and logical thing to do because you have some thyroid related risk that can lead to osteoarthritis. If your thyroid hormones are low chronically for a lot of years, you're going to basically have soft tissue degradation. Different than rheumatoid arthritis, it's osteoarthritis. Rheumatoid is when your immune system attacks your soft tissue. Osteo is when your soft tissue just kind of degrades and you get bones rubbing on bones. I know you know this, but I'm just saying it for your audience. Let's see, and blood flow too. I mean, these blood flow genes are real common, and it basically, and again, you know this, but your joints don't really have a lot of blood flow. They have synovial fluid. And to get that fluid moving, to get the toxins out of your joints and to get the nutrients in there, you got to move, right? Yep. And that's true for everybody, but especially for you because you got 2++ genes. And one of those is pretty common, ITGV, but still, like you're a higher responder to infrared light, for example, that helps to increase that blood flow into the joints. But at the end of the day, just move, don't sit too much, and if you do have to sit for long stretches, get up and shake your body out a little bit, do something. Pretty simple.
Check.
Yep. Yeah, man, you're pretty optimized. And the discs, you have that one interleukin gene, interleukin 1 alpha. Excuse me. And it's a twofold higher risk of low back issues, even as a plus minus. And I have a plus on this gene. I have a lot of back issues. I've had them since I was 12 years old. And what's really interesting for me, I fixed it with deadlifting, really. Like just after college, I was throwing my back every year since I was 12 years old, like literally bedridden for a week, just brutal. And I learned how to deadlift, and I didn't have issues for like 4 or 5 years after that. It was amazing. But I also found that if I hurt my back, if I get on some testosterone replacement for like a week or two, it heals almost immediately. It's like a couple of days later, I'm back in the gym. It's phenomenal because testosterone inhibits interleukins.
Got it.
So worst case scenario, that's probably what I recommend. Way better than curcumin at inhibiting interleukins. But of course, curcumin's a lot easier to get a hold of. But how's your low back? Is it pretty decent?
Yeah. I mean, being a retired chiro, I feel like I have a pretty good control of the spine health.
Yep. Yeah, and I've always had poor posture. Like my whole family has a lot of anterior pelvic tilt, and I really embody that. And like I said, I didn't know how to deadlift. I didn't know how to pick things up. I was always rounding my shoulders forward. I mean, so a lot of it's lifestyle, which I've learned how to manage. But I do have the gene as well. Bone strength, you've got some yin yang, just like before we talked about some of your other genes. I mean, you've got one gene for weaker, it's like your estrogen genes, I guess, right? One gene for weaker bones and then one gene for stronger bones. And they kind of offset, I'm not worried. And finally, like the sleep section, you only have one gene in here, and it's a night owl gene. So really, really clear in the sleep section. Obviously, you can still screw up your sleep. But I mean, if I had to guess, you're probably a pretty strong night owl.
Yeah.
By nature.
Yeah, I was all my life until like 5 years ago.
Yeah, you've basically readjusted.
Switched, and like now, like last night I went to bed at 8:30 and got up at 5.
Yep.
And I feel great.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, do you wear blue blockers and stuff?
Yep.
Yeah. Because you can definitely trick your brain into thinking that you're staying up late.
Interesting.
And your body thinks you're sleeping in quite a bit because as soon as you get up, you're turning lights on and things.
Yeah. I mean, when I wake up, it's like my sun's not out for 2.5 hours. So. Right.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, and that's a good point relating to pretty much any gene. Just because you have a late, like an early riser or late riser gene or whatever, doesn't mean you can't reprogram the system. But I think I found most people with these late riser genes, especially these period circadian regulator genes, their blood sugar manages better if they sleep in more, their mood is better, a lot of different things like that.
Yeah. And maybe sometime when I don't have 12 to 14 hours of work I need to do a day, I can test this out and see what it looks like.
Yep. Yeah. But yeah, man, I mean, honestly, that's the report. Did you have any questions going back on I know I was going pretty fast.
No, it's great. It's just hilarious. I took some notes as you were going through, and sort of got have good gut health, no nicotine, no mold, be in the sun, do intermittent fasting, no grains, being keto, keep your blood sugar low, vary your movement and exercise, just
basics. Yeah.
It sounds just there's a lot of tips you gave, but in general, a lot of them are probably just live like a human, and these are probably taken care of. The problem is that the vast majority of people don't.
Right. And
so I'm sure most people, when they do this, they find one thing that have drastic health outcomes, like the people you're talking about with lectins and coronary calcium scans, stuff like that.
Exactly.
So yeah. I mean,
it's 100%, man. I mean, the bilirubin and stuff would be a little unusual, but again, even for you, that's not an issue because you're out in the sun so much. Now up in Minnesota, that probably would be an issue, if you would have stayed up in Minnesota. But yeah, I mean, I agree, man. Most people, if they just do the fundamentals, that's exactly why you see so many testimonials and you see so much success from the basics, like eat less carbs, sleep better, all the usual stuff.
Do you get the sense that these are changing over time? And that, like, I don't know, obviously we don't have a lot of data from 1,000 years ago, but how do you think these SNPs have either increased or decreased due to like environmental pressure, if at all, over the last, 10,000 years?
Yeah. I don't think they change that quick, but what's interesting, epigenetic marks like methylations occur directly on the DNA, right? Like we talked about those musical notes before, and how the melody is your DNA, and then the chords on top of the melody are your epigenetics. The most common epigenetic change or the most common mutation in DNA is a C to T mutation, right? Like there's 4 base pairs, A, T, G, C in DNA, 4 base codes. So all your DNA code is letters A, T, G, or C. And the most common mutation is C to T. And when you have methylation marks on your DNA, it's on the letter C generally. So what's interesting, like I could go way down in the weeds here, but the point is, and the interesting aspect is, if you're changing your epigenetics a lot in a really consistent way, that increases, this is just a hypothesis, we don't know this for sure, but it probably increases your mutation rate. So it locks it in. So in other words, like you can have an epigenetic change that you're driving with lifestyle, and you just keep hammering that, and it'll actually turn into a DNA mutation and lock that in for potentially thousands of years.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. That's the real interesting aspect, I think, where we're changing our genetics, but it's not in the way that you were kind of suggesting in the question originally.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, you got to do it for not only yourself, but your great grandkids.
Yep. Yeah.
All right, Doc. Well, appreciate the time and all of the analysis. Where can people, if they want to do something like this, go to check more out?
Oh yeah. Well, AJ Consulting Company is my company, and my website is just ajconsultingcompany.com. It's a terrible website name. You got to spell out all the words and everything, but you have to add the word company, AJ Consulting Company. But I came up with in 2010, and it's not good marketing. I've never been good at marketing, but yeah, that's where people can at least find it.
Maybe the domain ajconsulting.co is available.
Something.
Maybe.
Well, I'm locked in now.
All right, man. Well, appreciate it as always. Anywhere else, anything else you want to let people know that you're up to?
No. I mean, I'm always on Instagram more than the other platforms, but I appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this with me. And it's kind of vulnerable, but I appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing, and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.